asked all the time about, from both sides. From the candidate side, how do I become an engineering leader, or am I the right fit for that, or how do I interview for this position? To I'm at a company that I want to be an engineering leader at. How do I grow into that? And on the other side, the company, how do I identify people that would be a good fit? How do I interview them? And how do I groom them, and how do I help them grow? So just before we get started, we are SingleSprout. SingleSprout is a tech-powered recruiting firm that focuses on growing tech teams that are solving some of the world's most challenging problems. And before we jump into today's event, please be sure to also sign up for our next event in just a few weeks with some great panelists. It's going to be on remote interviewing best practices, hosted by our very own manager of account management, Sophie. And so we'll have a link, if we don't already, that we can share, or Katie will share with you all. That's going to be really interesting. And I think that's separating companies today from companies that aren't doing as great on the hiring front as their interview processes and how they're able to get candidates excited. So joining me today to discuss engineering leadership are individuals that are very familiar and subject matter experts when it comes to engineering leadership. They're thoughtful, they're experienced. I'm personally so eager to learn from them. First up, we have Natalie. Natalie has owned people ops and talent acquisition at 3 growth startups, scaling headcounts by 2 to 11x. We're building the fundamentals of HR talent and employee experience. Currently, Natalie leads people and platform for BoldStart Ventures, harnessing pattern recognition to help their portfolio of seed stage founders build and scale people-first companies that focus on the entirety of the employee experience and life cycle. We also have Felton Vaughn. Felton is an engineer with over 14 years of experience. He's worked at Marvel, most recently at Hearst Magazines as a tech lead, and recently joined The Atlantic as a new engineering manager in November of 2020. We're excited to hear from him, as he was in the candidate experience in the last year and now managing as well, and hopefully growing more engineering leaders. And last but definitely not least, we have Renee Orser, VP of Engineering at Harbr, where she manages delivery and operations for Harbr's engineering org. Harbr's enterprise data exchange platform empowers orgs to unlock more value from their data and accelerate data-driven business models. Prior to Harbr, Renee was VP of Eng at NS1, a DNS and advanced internet traffic management startup based in New York. Previously, she spent a decade in international healthcare technology, managing teams, delivering digital healthcare products to governments and international nonprofits. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. Really excited to learn, really excited to take some tips away, practical tips that can be used today. And so I'll pass it to our panelists. We'll start with Renee, then Felton, and Natalie. Just as a quick icebreaker, what is one quality to look for in an engineering leader?
Ooh, I would say ability to make choices effectively, tied to what the business needs, and make some tough choices that maybe aren't the best for them, but good for the team.
I would say probably that they have a lot of interest in driving a bigger goal rather than like just their individual work.
I'm going to cheat on this one. I am going to use 2 words. I'm going to go with emotional intelligence or emotional quotient. I'm going with EQ. So I want to understand how this person deals with other people, how their social and self-awareness is, and how they read other people on their team's emotions in order to create psychological safety and elevate their team.
Love that. So we heard choices from Renee, ability to make choices, Felton driving a bigger goal, something bigger than oneself, and Natalie, EQ and emotional intelligence. Thank you so much. We're going to jump straight into the questions. What are some signs that might say it's time to seek roles either internally or externally that will give you the opportunity to grow into an engineering leadership role, as opposed to growing more on the individual contributor route? We'll start with Felton here. Katie, I think we need to unmute Felton.
Can't, okay, wait. Yeah, it didn't let me unmute for a second. Sorry about that. Yeah, so, well, I would say, like you would want to, I guess some of the signs are like you want to, like, well, me as an engineer, I would think like I want to like lead more. I want to have like not necessarily control, but you just want more input into what you're working on, or more input into the product or development of the product. So, you know, that kind of revolves around, you know, instead of just like, you know, you have your Jira tickets that you kind of work on, you think about things like, oh, you know, what, you know, how does this team work? You know, how does the team work along with each other to kind of work on this goal? You know, do we, you know, is everybody kind of like, is everybody ready, or is everybody like kind of have the things they need to kind of to work on this? So you worry about the team a little bit more. You kind of worry about the way that the speed of the things you're working on, in terms of like, you know, hey, can we deliver this on time? How do we arrange our things that we're working on in terms of speed and order to kind of work on things? So you kind of just think about that a little bit more than just your own individual work.
Renee, thoughts?
Yeah, I think my thoughts are very similar to Felton's actually, where I think when people are looking to make more of an impact than they can singularly, I've always considered that to be a really good sign that somebody's sort of on the right path. So when they're looking to be able to sort of multiply their impact, I think that ties as well to wanting to be able to influence the company's success and be able to figure out how to multiply their impact towards what the company is aiming for. And last, also, I think it's always important that people are eager to mentor and eager to help others in their career path. It's usually a great indication.
And do you think people, just a follow up, do you think as an engineer currently, do you think it's something that you should just go to your manager and say, hey, I want to mentor more? Or are there signals that they should be looking for?
Yeah, I think it's always great to talk to folks that are directly responsible for what you're doing day to day, first and foremost, to sort of express what your desires and interests are. There's always good opportunities, usually, regardless of the role that you're in, to have mentorship capabilities as a part of your job. And there might be opportunities that you're not seeing otherwise, or you might be able to come with suggestions for how to do that. But regardless of sort of if and when something is opening up in the company, from a management perspective, there are other ways, I think, to help hone those skills on your path to getting there as well. And the manager can definitely help you with that.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. Natalie, anything to add there?
Look, I think that in terms of management, we want to see that you've mentored before. One of the things I always look for organically is who's the person that all of the new engineers are going to? Who are they seeking out to like teach them things, to transfer institutional knowledge, those kinds of things, and thinking about that person sort of as a almost as a thought leader in terms of your group of engineers.
Love that. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. What should an aspiring engineering leader look for in a company to give that person the best chance at growth? What's a good sign in the company, Natalie?
So as someone who has built a number of interviewing processes for literally every role in a tech startup in 3 different startups, I think one of the things as a candidate, and one of the things that like people don't understand, is there's no real way to interview. There's not this is more of an art than a science. And so one of the things that I say to all candidates is always ask. And so what that looks like is we know that engineers and engineering leaders are going to be part of that interview process. What are you asking them? Are you asking them about what does growth look like as an individual engineer? you should ask them about training programs. Do they have an education stipend? What are they doing to develop their engineers? And I think the other thing, and this is actually something that I feel like a lot of people do not take advantage of, is ask to meet individual contributors at the company who have already made that move into a managerial role, and ask them. Once you've figured out like who's already done the thing that you're looking to do, which is move up the ranks from an IC to a manager, ask them to introduce you to people who have made that change. And I would say the biggest signal is, if there isn't anyone, if they can't give you someone or introduce you to someone who has who's been through that transformation before.
I love that. I think, getting candidates and having them ask questions and hopefully see also on public profiles or the website what benefits a company has for learning and development, specifically for getting into a leadership role, is something that companies should, in my opinion, publish or at least share in a public way so that candidates know about that. Would you add anything, Renee or Felton?
I don't know if I have anything else to add to what Natalie's saying. I think that sounded about right. How about you, Felton?
Okay.
Yeah, me either. I think that was perfect.
Awesome, thanks. And we'll do a Q&A at the end, but feel free to drop your questions in the chat. What's a red flag on someone's profile that a company might say this person probably isn't a fit at this time, and why? We'll ask Renee.
Yeah, so I think this was an interesting question because I think that there's a difference between somebody not being fit for a manager role versus the role that you have. And so when I was thinking about red flags, I was thinking about it mostly from a sort of a question back to you around, not you specifically, but the general you, around what is it that you are looking for in the role to make sure that you have that well defined. I think that when I've been hiring sort of for early type management roles with a very immature sort of unprocessed type team, it's important to find folks who have done it before in some way, shape, or form, and who have sort of translated their skills from opportunity to opportunity. And so seeing somebody who's only managed sort of in one place, coming out of an IC style role, they might not sort of have enough experience to translate that to a new and very ambiguous environment. Or, in the opposite type of realm, if you have a much larger team and you're looking at a very specific scope with very specific objectives, it might be a great opportunity for a new manager to try out those skills. So I think when I think about red flags, I tend to think about a match with what the responsibilities are and how that ties to experience. I know that when we were prepping for this panel, we spent a bit of time in this question around a cover letter and the contentious nature of a cover letter and whether or not do you include them, do you not? And I have found that particularly for folks whose resume might not match up one for what you're looking for, a cover letter can be a great opportunity for people to explain why they want the role. And so targeting specific questions in your application process that can help you get over the boundaries of a non-traditional resume or one that might not align with your expectation of the candidate you'll see, but could be a great fit based on their competencies, I think can help get over that barrier a bit and help sort of quell red flags that the candidate might not mean to convey. So.
Natalie, anything to add there? Thanks, Renee.
Yeah, so I would just, everything that Renee said, and this is from the perspective of Renee running engineering teams and myself owning like the talent part of it. I think past success is always the biggest indicator of success in a role. So I want to see where you've led in the past. That could be, I started a community group. That could be, I led a mentorship program. That could be, someone reached out to me on LinkedIn and I started mentoring them. So I actually want to see examples of you being a leader in your past roles and or your life outside of your role. I would again double click on what Renee said. Most of us don't look for cover letters anymore. It's kind of, it feels a little old fashioned at this point. But at the end of the day, your job as a candidate trying to get a role is to help recruiters connect the dots. If we know that recruiters are spending like 30 seconds on a resume, your job is actually to connect the dots for them, make it really easy for them. And so it is actually the responsibility of the candidate to show those opportunities that they've had in order to like exemplify what they could do or would do in a leadership role.
Thank you. We always love that as recruiters, and the more information, the more data we can share, the better. And I really appreciate that, because especially if you're trying to get into your first engineering leader or any sort of leadership role, it's important to share what you've done in the past. And even if it's unorthodox or not production or professional level experience, that does say something, and that is another data point. And you never know how that will translate. It could only help is my thought process too. Felton, anything to wrap us up, anything to add or in your own experience?
I guess the only thing I would think of is that, you know, when you look at somebody's profile, you do want to see the possible leadership there, but you also want to see that this person's experience is kind of like, it seems like they're more aware that like an engineering management job is not really just like a jump, or, you know, just something kind of to get out of the IC thing. It has to be like, you know, you have to see that kind of leadership that's already been there, whether they've been like a tech lead or more of a senior engineer, or, you know, if you speak to them, they talk about more like, oh, hey, you know, I kind of delivered this big project, you know, with regards to, instead of just kind of talking about like, you know, how well they know algorithms. So it's always good to kind of hear more of that side rather than the more IC side of things.
Yeah, speaking, you know, holistically of what you've led, even if it isn't specifically people, that's going to help, as opposed to like specifically if someone asks you about that, here's, you know, how we did it and the algorithm that we used and stuff like that. That makes a lot of sense. Last question on the identifying category, and we're going to be talking next about interviewing and growing. This is for you, Felton. How important is the use of an advisor to get into a management track or a management role? What role does an advisor play? Maybe from your own experience.
I think it kind of depends, but in my experience, I kind of think it's very important. So you know, before I became before I was a manager, you know, my manager, you know, would ask me sometimes like, hey, are you interested in management? Are you interested, you know, do you want to try this? And I always would say no. And, you know, during my, you know, my job search, I was actually, you know, Luke kind of introduced me to the Atlantic. And he just sent me a text. It was like, hey, you know, the Atlantic is looking for an engineering manager. And I'm like, wait, is this this says management. I don't know what is this? And, you know, he kind of like said like, hey, you know, just go try it out, check it out. And, you know, so it's like, you kind of, sometimes it's good to have those people around you that kind of like would see those signs that you don't see yourself. So yeah, like that, you know, I think it's probably, I think it's very helpful. I would say that like sometimes it might not work for you, but I think, you know, those people who could kind of see that in you and can kind of just say like, hey, you know, why don't you try this? Or hey, why don't you kind of do more things to do more leading? Not necessarily like that, but like, you know, just kind of smaller tasks. Yeah, I think that's always a good thing. And yeah, if it wasn't for Luke, I don't think I would be a manager right now. So
we appreciate that, and Luke's fantastic, one of our recruiters here at SingleSprout. Appreciate you saying that. Natalie, Renee, anything to add there on the use of an advisor? It doesn't need to be, obviously, you know, recruiters help, whether external or internal. It could be people outside. What do you think?
I'm going to take this one, I guess, from the VC side. I think, again, kind of going back to, I feel like the world of recruiting, interviewing, et cetera, has expanded and has taken a number of different shapes from this sort of old-fashioned, stodgy way. You have to have one page resume, all of those things. And so what I'm telling you is to, as an individual, is like, don't think of it in these traditional parameters. Sorry. Also, I have a Chihuahua here who's snorting a lot. I'm just gonna put that out there. But what I would say also is one avenue that a lot of people do not take, that I think is a really good avenue to pursue, is actually asking their managers, if it's even a smaller team, asking their founders, to get connected to a lot of the VCs out there now have like platform teams, have people ops types of teams. And so reach out to those people. I mean, at the end of the day, they probably have the best networks. And so in a lot of cases, they're looking for opportunities to mentor the leaders in the companies that they're funding. And so I feel like that's a resource that a lot of people don't take advantage of.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I found my role at Harbr through Natalie, ironically, but I met Natalie through a friend who I met through a coach. And so when you're thinking about finding the right role, there's so much nuance to finding the right company and the right people to work with in the team. And I think it's important to have people on your side helping figure out what that is and what that can mean, and pressure testing a bit your priorities and what you're, thinking about your skill sets a little bit more critically and that sort of thing. And just as well, once you get started, helping you understand if what you're seeing is normal, and is it something that is logical, and are you attacking it the right way, and are there other ideas and ways you can do it? Just really good help around setting parameters for understanding the situation you're in and the role you're in and the way that you're carrying it out eventually too.
That's awesome. I
Yeah.
really appreciate that. We're obviously going to put Felton, Renee, and Natalie's email in the chat, and we'll have Q&A after, but I'm sure they'd be open to also having a conversation, or know someone that would be a good fit to have a conversation. And I think this also goes back to one thing that Natalie said earlier, which is just asking more questions in the interview process, but also around the people that you're with. In order to find the right person, sometimes you need to be able to ask the right question. And we're not mind readers at the end of the day. In an ideal world, the person goes to their manager or founder and they say, you're perfect and here's how we're going to help you. But more times than not, that's not how it works. And there needs to be a push, and that's okay. And there's a lot of people out there that want to help and probably can give you a lot of good perspective of what this company is like versus that company, and where they're at in their career and where the company's at in their life cycle. There's a lot of different factors here that you probably aren't going to get on your own from just interviewing. Natalie, were you going to say something?
No, I was just saying that's absolutely right. 100%.
Cool. I learned a lot from you too. What should a candidate without Eng leadership experience show or say in the interview process to stand out? We get asked this question quite a bit. We'll start with Renee and then move to Natalie.
Ooh, yeah, I think it's important to demonstrate why what you're interested in matters to the business that you're applying to, and to sort of demonstrate commitment to sort of fighting for what's right for the business. I am often interested in how I'd mentioned choices at the beginning of the call, but I think that this ties closely to this question, where if you're thinking about situational style questions and thinking about, as a candidate, how do I show that I'm the right fit for this team? A big part of your job is ultimately going to be delivering something for that business. And so being able to demonstrate how you think about that holistically and how you trade off commitments around that, I think is super important. I think that there's a component both from an interviewer and interviewee perspective around, it's a complicated concept, but I think when you step into a management role, your peer group and your sort of allegiance trends in the direction of other managers and other executives at the business. And that sort of loyalty ends up trending in the direction of making decisions that pushes the business objectives forward. And it's a bit of a shift, I think, when you're first stepping into management, to step away from a peer group of team members into sort of, I'm managing that team and my peer group is other managers. And I often, in my interview questions to folks, suss out their understanding of that dichotomy and their sort of allegiance shift. And I think as a candidate, it's important to remember that you're joining a very specific type of role and group of people at that company, and to be able to sort of express how you operate that way and how you work with your team members to enable them and ensure that they're aligning with the right priorities and those pieces. So two interconnected ideas, but I think both of those are important.
I love it. Being able to deliver for the business where your loyalty and obviously part of the business you're in would change. And so people want to hear that. That makes total sense. Natalie, do you want to add anything?
I mean, look, like my perspective again is from the like hiring, scaling companies perspective. And so I work with a lot of candidates in order to identify what things will make them aligned with a particular job. And I think part of that is really, sorry. This is Rosie. She's here today.
Hey, Rosie.
She's part of the deal. It's a double package situation. But I think I like Renee said, like I want to see demonstrate, like we know that the biggest predictor of success is success in other roles, whether that be, again, and this is like highlighting the right things, whether that be community management, whether that be like participation in different events, whether that be taking initiative to do like a feature review with your entire company, all of those things. I want to look at areas where you've taken the lead. And then the other piece is kind of what I was talking about before, which is, do people look to you as a leader? And we know that from the new people that we bring in and who they kind of start to gravitate to. And so I want to hear you as a candidate actually explain that. And I want you to be like highlighting that as well. And that includes obviously like mentorship, but the other, I think, big sort of like crucial thing with leadership is, at least from my perspective, is this like servant leadership approach, where how are you elevating, lifting up people on your team? How are you giving them shine? How are you, acting like a empathetic, vulnerable leader who is, again, there to support the team in their execution.
I love that. Obviously, elevating people. How do people look at you, to you? What's your initiative? What's your background? What's your past successes? Felton, would you add anything there?
I think you got it all. Yeah.
Cool. I'll add something on my own, which Renee had me think about, which is thinking about the business from a higher level. When you go into the interview, do you know what the vision of the company is? Do you know what the mission of the company is? Do you know what the values are? And are you aligned to those values? Obviously, we're not advocating for people to lie, but within reason, you should be able to talk about your past experiences and yourself and align them with the values, the mission, and the vision of the company, which hopefully is on the company's website or one page, or you receive that from someone that you know at the company. But I think that can help you go above and beyond the interview process of saying, hey, here's what my understanding is of what the company wants to do. Here's how my background translates to that.
And it's also a great way to ask questions during the interview too, to get more clarity on those pieces, to sort of to demonstrate that you're in it for the right reasons too.
I love that. So simple, but I don't see a lot of candidates asking those questions, especially when they're trying to go into a more leadership type role. You want to know yourself, like, hey, am I going to stick with this? Am I aligned to go long term if I'm going to grow with the company? What skills did you study up on?
Doing this engineering, like the management interview was like completely different. There was a little bit of technical things, but not really. So I kind of focused more on talking about, like, instead of talking about like the actual way that I solve the problem in terms of like an algorithm or some technology that I use, I kind of talked more about how did I deliver something, how did I with the team that I had, how did I accomplish a goal, how did I see what the problems were within trying to solve that goal, and talking about like how I work with other members of the company. So like I talked more about like, hey, I talked to product and this is kind of how we kind of hash this thing out. We kind of built Jira tickets and things like that. So I kind of, instead of just thinking about like the actual like work that I normally did, it was more about like, how did I identify myself within the team to actually complete this goal. So it was, I just kind of had to step back and kind of think about things a little bit. My resume was kind of like that. I did like team lead stuff, so I kind of talked more about that. But I had to, tone down the coding portion a little bit and talk more about, the employees that I kind of mentored and tried to get trying to get going in this in that direction.
And I think that's very smart. I mean, that goes down to the first question, which is, what do you look for? And one thing you said was driving a bigger goal, right? Besides what you did yourself. And Renee said that the choices that one makes in the process outside of actually just doing so. Makes a lot of sense. Anything to add there, Natalie or Renee? I think you're on mute.
I would, I would just say that there's a number of leadership books that are really helpful in terms of like facilitating the actions that you need to take as someone who's an IC trying to move into a leadership role. One book that I love is Leaders Eat Last. But there are, the hard thing about hard things, the five, what is it called? The five, dysfunctions of a team. There's just a number. And actually I remember Felton bringing up the Radical Candor book also is just, there is a lot of literature and also point people that you can kind of, I feel like, lean on. So I just think there's a lot of information out there that people do not take in. That's just, available to everybody.
Leaders Eat Last. I haven't heard of that one. I'll have to check that one out. Renee, anything on your end before we move on? Okay. As a company, what are some ways to really understand motivations and values of the person interviewing to give yourself the best chance of a successful hire? Soft skills, Renee.
Yeah. So I have a very simple one that I always lean on first, and I have a couple other examples, but I think the simplest piece is watching for I language versus we language. It's something I'm very sensitive to in interview situations, probably oversensitive. I try not to over-calibrate on it. There's a really tricky balance, I think, between explaining your impact to a situation and how you coached and mentored a group through a challenge versus taking credit for something. And I think it's important to watch how people attribute credit to team deliverables and think about when within their language, how they're expressing what the team was able to accomplish. And therefore, as a manager, what they did as a part of that versus what I did with my team. Does that distinction sort of make sense so far? Yeah. So I pay a lot of attention to I versus we, and I frequently with new managers that come in will also correct it over and over and over, and I get mean about it, but I think it's important that we attribute credit to a full team when they're doing the work together. I've also thought through, I will ask questions about moments where they've enabled somebody in their group, where somebody had a huge growth moment. Like, tell me a story about somebody on your team where they tried a totally new challenge, or they were really failing in this one area and then they became successful in some way. And I asked them to just tell me about that and see how far they sort of disassociate from the story and explain this growth path. And then I will usually follow that up with, how did you enable it? Tell me about your impact on it, and then what did you learn from that situation as well. And it can give good insight into how they see their responsibility towards their team members. And then last, I often look at how people think about team composition and gaps and competencies there. And if somebody is lacking in a particular skill in their group, how do they think about filling that skill gap? Is it around, do they have coaching options? Do they think about training options? Do they think about new hires so that they have a better mix of skills coming into the group and everybody has a better chance of success, right? How do they think about sort of diversity within their team of skill set and of experience? And I have found that can help think about, how they approach teams from a sort of a humanistic perspective, as well as a methodical sort of categorizing type perspective as well. So, yeah.
That's fantastic. Just to echo that, so we have I language should actually be we language.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where someone enabled growth in their team, and then gaps in team composition and how to make up for that.
Yeah.
There's always going to be gaps, right?
Yeah.
And that's a valid question when you're focusing on an IC role. It's like, what are my own gaps?
Yeah.
When you're thinking of a team, where is the team gaps? How can we get better? That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for sharing that.
Super important that they don't try to fill it themselves too. If we want to go all the way back to the red flag question, filling a gap yourself as a manager is a very short-term solution. So yeah.
Right. Anything out there, Felton or Natalie?
I feel like, honestly, Renee hit all of the things that I actually end up looking for. I think when you're talking to someone about something that they're particularly proud of, or when they've been most satisfied, or their work again in their past role, are they talking about relationships? Are they talking about growing people in their team? What are they taking credit for? Which I think goes back to what Renee was saying about I versus we. And what are they most excited about and passionate about in terms of where they work? I think you just, again, from the interviewer side as well, you have to ask those very direct questions about where are they getting, what are they most proud of in their career? And if it ends up being things like mentorship, things like, holding the hand of new employees, pair programming, and helping people get institutional knowledge, all of those things, you're getting a really good insight into the things that obviously we want. At least my intention at the end of the day is only to connect people with jobs that they're really passionate about, excited about. That's the most important thing to me. So asking them directly what they're most proud of and what they've built, be that community or even teams, that's, I'm looking for what they're what are those things that they're most excited and passionate about in their current roles.
Thank you. Felton, anything to add?
Just one thing about the I versus we. So I this kind of goes back into the things that I had to study up on. So, when you do an IC interview, you always want to mention the I portion of it. It's actually a red flag if I'm looking for an engineer, an IC engineer, that they always say we, because I always say well, did somebody help you with this? So it's it's kind of like a disconnect you have
balance.
to do. Yeah, it's like that kind of disconnect you have to do when you talk about your accomplishments, because you always have to talk about the team rather than just you, the person getting credit. So yeah, that's one thing you got to think about.
Thanks for sharing that. It's a great point. It's a great point, because you're going to get drilled on that question next of who actually did what in this process. That makes a lot of sense. Just a few questions left. Natalie, what role does or should executive leadership play in the interview process for an engineering leader?
I would say that probably Renee is a better person to answer this, but what I would say is, like, assuming that you've run a really thoughtful and rigorous process, I don't actually want my executives, unless they're directly managing the people involved in the interview process. Like, I want them as, you know, the very last interviewer in an entire process. And so thinking about it as like empowering our people, our individual contributors, as well as like anybody who's in a managerial role, giving them the opportunity to decide who moves forward and who does not, I think is, I mean, that's part of like teaching someone how to lead. But so in saying that, the role of the executive is truly at the tail end of the entire process. And so the biggest thing is you are an evangelist. You are brought in to sell value, sell opportunity, sell the company, sell the role. And so for me, I've always leaned on executives to come in, and it's less about interviewing, and it's really more about like closing the candidate, and selling the values of the company and the role.
Renee, Felton? I think Renee is on mute.
There you go. Yeah, I think it's really, in many ways, I think the exact responsibility to sell the role, just sell, and sort of be able to provide answers to questions around the trajectory of the company and what the plans are and how that's going to impact you if you come in, and really sort of help set the vision. But really, it's to sell. I feel like I told a little anecdote before. I think there's only one person on this call that knows my former CEO, but probably a million. But I used to, if we had a candidate that we were really eager to sell but a little uncertain about, they would occasionally accidentally cross paths in the kitchen when we, in between interviews, and I would just ask him to make sure he was there at this 15-minute block and casually get coffee and chat about it, because I think it's helpful to sort of connect to the energy of the company, the founder, and really make sure that people understand why we're there and why we're working on something. So it's great to figure out opportunities to sort of use that selling motion towards candidates and make them understand that there's sort of a heartbeat behind everything that's going on.
Felton, anything to add there?
The only thing I can think of is like, yeah, whenever I was in an interview and I saw like, the candidate list like went higher and higher, I knew I was doing good. So I think that's always like a good sign. I always have like, executive leadership there, especially if it's somebody like you really want, just kind of do that last little sale.
Yeah. And I'll add to that. I mean, in terms of selling in the process, hopefully companies are training their interviewers to also sell the other interviews, all the other interviewers in the process and their backgrounds and how they've grown and where they've come from. And, hopefully that person is excited to meet this person and not just say, like, who is this? Who's in front of me right now? Because each person in the process should play a specific role. And ideally there's transparency ahead of time for the candidate, as well as for the people interviewing, of who this person is and their background and whatnot. No one should be surprised, is the point. Our final section on growing. How can one set themselves up internally for success when they are in an engineering leadership or soon to be eng leadership position? So they're already in the company. What could they do? Resources, anything we missed? Felton and Natalie.
I'd say, just you probably just want to talk to your manager. Kind of ask your manager, like, hey, I have a little bit of interest in management. Is there any way you can kind of like set me up for success, basically? Can I mentor? Can I take the lead on certain things? Is there anything that you're working on that I can kind of take over? That might be a little extreme, but sometimes that works.
I would, oh, sorry, Felton.
No,
Did
go
I
ahead.
cut you off? No, I mean, I would essentially say the same thing. And then just from like, from the perspective of the company, when you have someone who you kind of see as potential for leadership, I think part of the manager and leadership team is to, let's say leadership team is to, with people ops, build programs like leadership programs. How are you actually training people who are interested in leadership before they actually get to the place? And so that can look like a lot of different things. I mean, if you are, let's say, using like the Spotify sort of method that everyone's kind of like broken up in pods or broken up in squads, who's stepping up? Are you giving those people, are you giving the people who are stepping up opportunities to grow and develop? And so I think like actually a lot of this is, what does the company build in order to facilitate individual growth, to be honest.
Thank you. Sorry, I was on mute right there. I know we have just a few minutes left. We do have more questions, but I wanted to give an opportunity to anyone out there, and thanks so much. I think we had over 50 people at one point, which is awesome to see on such a niche topic as well. Does anyone have any questions that they want to drop in the chat or just ask for Natalie, Renee, or Felton? If not, we can also keep carrying on with our questions. I will jump in with more questions then. But we'd love to hear from you, and we can always email them after. What can companies do better once identifying the right people for this sort of role, Renee?
Sorry, I was not expecting that one. Sorry. Companies do better after identifying, you said?
Yeah, after someone's in place, they've hired that person, maybe they're not in the eng leadership position right away. How can they set people up better?
Gotcha. I think a lot of that's about clear expectations. I think it's very important that you as a manager of that person, or as sort of a leader in that department, understand what to you their success would look like, so that your expectations are in line with that work that they're actually doing. So I think it's often not enough to just set the goals. I think you have to sort of interrogate your own sense of expectation and make sure that if the end result of what you put forward, like, will you feel like there's been great accomplishment at that point? Will they feel like they have achieved enough? Are they learning throughout that process? And really step back and think hard about what it is that they're doing. So I think it just takes time to set the right goals for people and make sure that you're framing it the right way. The other piece too, I think, ties to the mentorship. And I think that companies, if individuals express interest in finding a mentor, I think companies should take those requests very seriously and use their networks. I think especially in the startup space around New York, a lot of people in more senior leadership roles end up knowing a lot of people in other senior leadership roles at startups. There's a huge amount of support for leadership level positions, not always as much support for management style roles, tech lead style roles, things like that. And so using the network that you have available to you to find ways to mentor others, I think can be a huge lift for those that are trying out a new role or new to the company.
That's really interesting, and we keep talking about mentors, and I think the last question is on that. But something that I'm taking away from this is having a conversation with employees about mentorship and what that means to them, and that's okay if it's not their direct manager, right? Maybe even better to have that outside perspective. And gone are the days of, it might have been in the past, it was not a great idea to talk to someone outside of the company, and who knows what you'll share. it's transparency is more important than anything, I think, in my opinion, right now, to have a good employee experience and to have a good culture. And that's something that if you can help your employee out and get them a good mentor, be a part of that, or at least encourage it, that should know that you have their best interest at heart. And that's usually what people want. So I really, really appreciate it. That's definitely a good takeaway from me. Felton, Natalie, anything to add there?
Yeah, this is interesting because at the Atlantic, there was like, like a little get together of engineers and a few managers, just kind of like talking about like, hey, are you interested in management? Here's a few things you kind of would need to know. Yeah, it's just kind of, the engineers can kind of just listen in to see like what the usual day-to-day is, and they can kind of go from there. And it is like promoted, so there is a track for management and engineers to kind of jump on that track. So just kind of putting that out there and putting that in the forefront. Just in delivering the expectations. Yeah, so I would have loved it if somebody told me how many meetings I would be in as an engineering manager. That would have been great. I would have still went for it. I mean, I would have been like, yeah, that's fine, but yeah, I would have liked to known that beforehand.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, that is the case. More responsibility, probably more meetings, and we could probably have a whole other panel on meetings. Natalie, anything to add there before our last question?
No, I think Felton just did a great job of wrapping that up.
Awesome. I think that's it actually, because we covered mentorship. I really, really appreciate everyone that joined. Obviously, specifically Felton, Renee, Natalie, so gracious and generous with your time to educate us. We're going to have a recording we can send out. Please reach out to them. Maybe we can drop your email in the chat and we can share that. But you were all amazing, and I learned so much, and we're going to pass this on to our candidates and our companies as well. Anything else that I missed before we sign off here?
I would say always ask. Just ask. It's always okay to ask for examples, for introductions, for basically everything I feel like is kind of is available to you. And so I would just empower people to say, let me understand how you do this. Let me understand give me a good illustration of what moving into a leadership role is. And again, like introduce me to people who have done that thing before.
Thank you. Renee, Felton, anything else?
Now, if your heart's in it, definitely take the leap. There are people that can help figure out how to do it with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Really, really appreciate everyone that joined, and hope everyone has a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.